I handed my granddaughter the present I had made with my own hands. My son-in-law barked, "Leave it in the box." Before she could even open it, he grabbed her arm. "People like you don't belong at my client's table." I kept my voice steady. "Don't speak to me like that in front of my grandchildren." He stepped forward and slapped me straight across the face in front of 50 guests. My own daughter just stood there like nothing had happened. "So, before we keep going, thank you for being here. It truly means a lot. Please leave a comment and let me know where you're listening from, your city, your country. I like knowing who's sitting in this room with me." Just a quick note. This story includes fictional elements created for entertainment and reflection. Any resemblance to real names or places is purely coincidental, but the message behind it is very real. The needle passed through the leather, sinking row 47. I counted every single pass. That is the kind of man I am. The kind who sits under a yellow bulb at 11 at night in a shoe repair shop on Elmwood Avenue in Buffalo, New York, while the November wind rattles the front window like it has a personal grudge. The kind who has spent 45 years pulling waxed thread through fine leather, stitch by painstaking stitch. My name is Edmund Calloway. Most folks call me Ed. I'm 70 years old, and these hands tell the whole story without me having to say a word. The knuckles are swollen from decades of gripping awls and cobbler hammers. The palms are permanently stained with a watercolor of glue, leather dye, and polishes in brown, black, and deep burgundy that no amount of soap will ever wash away. My wedding band has worn a deep groove into my ring finger, an indentation that isn't going anywhere. Maggie used to press her fingertip right in to that groove and say, That's where you belong, Ed." Maggie, Margaret Calloway, 67, with sharp eyes behind her reading glasses and a deep laugh that fills up an entire room. Right now, she was in the back room, feet up on a stool, a mystery novel open on her lap, and a cup of coffee growing cold on the side table. She was always doing that, getting so wrapped up in a story that she forgot to drink her coffee. 42 years of marriage. Not a single morning went by where I wasn't grateful to have her. I set the needle down and held the piece up to the light. A small shoe, child-sized, built for a young girl's narrow foot. Soft brown leather, a rounded toe, and a single strap across the top. 3 weeks ago, I had cut the pattern from the finest piece of leather I had left in the back stock. The good stuff usually saved for custom orders, for customers who knew quality when they saw it. I carved the sole by hand, punched the holes with a number 4 awl, and now I was on my 3rd night of stitching. "Ed," Maggie called from the back. "You're going to blind yourself back there." "I can see fine," I called back. "You said that last year, and you still ended up needing new glasses." "I needed new glasses because the optometrist said so. That's entirely different." I heard her deep laugh and the sound of her setting her book down next to that cold coffee. "Who is that for?" she asked, appearing in the doorway in her robe and slippers, squinting at the tiny shoe in my hands. "Rosie," I said. Whenever either of our 2 grandchildren came up, Maggie's face went through the same shift. Her whole expression softened, the lines around her eyes deepening into something warm. She walked across the room, stood beside me, and looked down at the shoe. "Her birthday is still 3 weeks away," she said. "I know when her birthday is, Maggie. Are you going to stitch your name on the inside?" "I'm stitching her name," I said, "and something else on the insole." I pointed to the faint pencil marks I had traced onto the leather lining. "Walk with kindness wherever you go." Maggie pressed her lips together, her eyes shining with that look that always filled my chest with love for her. Edmund Calloway, she said softly. You're a good man. I pushed the needle through the next hole without answering. 42 years of marriage had taught me that Maggie was usually right about things, and the best response was to let her be right without making a fuss. Rosie Hurst was turning 10 this December. She was my daughter Diane's oldest, serious, and watchful. The kind of child who noticed far more than adults gave her credit for. She had Diane's dark eyes and her grandmother's stubbornness, which meant she would hold her ground on a point long past the moment most people would have given up. I adored her completely. Her younger brother, Cooper, was 7. Where Rosie was cautious, Cooper was a wrecking ball in sneakers. He asked enough questions to wear out a research librarian. Last Tuesday on the drive to school, in the span of 12 minutes, he asked me why clouds don't fall down, whether dogs dream about people or other dogs, and if I had ever eaten anything so good it made me cry. To that last one, I told him yes. He asked what it was, and I said his grandmother's apple pie. He nodded with total gravity, as if I had confirmed something he had long suspected. I loved that boy so much it scared me sometimes. Diane was 38. She had my build, solid and strong, and Maggie's laugh, though she used it less these days. 6 years ago, she had married Brandon Hurst, and they lived in a house in Amherst, with a 2-car garage and a lawn that needed mowing every 10 days in the summer. Brandon worked in finance. He was 42, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who filled up a doorway just by standing in it and knew it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The story I need to tell you, the one that really matters, starts with this shoe, and in a way, it ends with it too. But before we get to the end, I need to take you back. Back to where things began, to the parts most people never saw and never bothered to ask about. For the first 4 years of Diane's life, I raised her alone. Maggie was fighting a kidney condition that nearly took her from us when Diane was just 18 months old. During those 4 years, I ran this shop, made shoes for other people's children, packed Diane's lunch every morning, and sat by her bed every night until she fell asleep. We didn't have much, but we had enough because I made it enough. Piece by piece, heel by heel, soul by soul. Diane grew up watching me work. She sat right on that stool in the corner, the wooden one that's still there with the slightly wobbly left leg. She did her homework there while I stitched, hammered, and polished. She never complained, never asked for things I couldn't give her. Through her entire childhood, she was the best thing in my life, second only to her mother. I want you to hold on to that picture for a moment. That little girl on the wobbly stool, her legs dangling because they couldn't reach the floor, her pencil moving across a math worksheet while her father worked beside her. Because the story I'm about to tell is about what happens when love is taken for granted for too long. It's about what happens when the people you would give everything for start mistaking your willingness to give as a sign that you have no worth at all. I placed the shoe on the workbench. 47 stitches done, 31 to go. Come to bed soon, Maggie said from the doorway, her hand resting on the frame. 1 more hour, I said. She gave me the look she had given me 10,000 times before, equal parts exasperation and tenderness. Then she went back to her book. I picked up the needle again. I thought Rosie's birthday party was going to be a good day. I was wrong. But to understand why I was wrong, you need to know what came before it. It didn't start with a birthday. It started on a morning, a very early morning, 3 years before any of this happened. It was the first time I saw the true shape of the life my daughter had built, and the invisible scaffolding holding it up. When the alarm went off at 4:45 a.m., I was already awake. That's the thing about being 70. Sleep becomes a suggestion rather than a guarantee. I had been lying there since 4:15, listening to the Lake Erie wind rattle the storm windows, watching the numbers change on the clock, running through the morning checklist in my head like I always did. Rosie had a spelling test. Cooper needed his field trip permission slip signed, which Diane had forgotten to do again. So I had put it on the passenger seat of my truck the night before. The weather app on my phone said clear roads, but the temperature was 12 degrees Fahrenheit, which meant the truck would need a full 10 minutes to warm up. I got out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Maggie. She was sleeping on her side toward the window, her breathing slow and even, her right hand with its arthritis curled loosely near her pillow. Her joint medication made her sleep heavier in the mornings, which was the only kindness that medicine offered, as far as I was concerned. I pulled the blanket up over her shoulder before I left the room. Downstairs, I brewed coffee in the dark. While it dripped, I pulled on my thermal underwear, a flannel shirt, my heavy Carhartt jacket, and a wool cap. Then I walked out the back door. There is a specific kind of cold in Buffalo at 4:50 on an October morning that only people who have lived through great war can fully picture. It gets into your bones before you even realize you're outside. The moment I pushed the door open, my breath turned into a thick cloud of fog. I walked across the driveway to the truck, unlocked it, started the engine, and stood in the dark scraping, frost off the windshield, while the defroster began its slow work inside. "Good morning to you too," I said to the empty yard. After 45 years of early mornings, I had developed the habit of talking through them. I scraped the passenger side, the rear window, and both side mirrors. By the time I was done, my fingers inside my gloves were aching. I climbed into the cab, held my hands over the heater vents, and waited for the engine to warm up. At 5:15, I backed out of the Elmwood driveway and headed toward Amherst. The streets were nearly empty. A delivery truck on Sheridan Drive, a lone runner on Main Street who gave my headlights a brief nod like we were old friends, who happened to be the last two people alive at that hour. It felt that way, too. I stopped at Murphy's Bakery, on the corner of Kenmore, because Tommy Murphy opened the back door at 5:00 a.m. to take the bread deliveries. Over the years, he had gotten into the habit of leaving 2 egg and cheese sandwiches ready for me when he saw my truck pull up outside. "Morning, Ed," Tommy said, sliding the waxed paper bag across the counter before I even opened my mouth. "It's a cold one." "Sure is," I agreed. I paid him, and less than 3 minutes later, I was back in the truck. At 5:38, I pulled into Diane and Brandon's driveway in Amherst. The house was pitch black, except for the porch light that Diane always left on. I didn't knock. I had a key given to me 2 years ago, when Diane started her early shifts, and I walked quietly into the entryway. The kitchen smelled like last night's dinner, garlic and roasted meat. I set the bag of sandwiches on the counter and walked upstairs. Cooper's door was open. I pushed it wider and looked in. He was sleeping on his back, one arm thrown over his face, his SpongeBob comforter tangled around his legs like he had fought a war with it in his sleep and lost. I smiled so hard my face hurt. "Hey, buddy," I whispered. "Time to get up." Cooper made a sound that didn't belong to any language, but clearly communicated his feelings about the concept of morning. "Got egg sandwiches downstairs," I said. One eye opened. "Murphy's?" "Murphy's." Both eyes opened. He sat up, his hair sticking up in 4 directions at once, looking at me with a mix of sleep and deep betrayal that was the funniest thing I had seen all week. "Grandpa," he said, "why is it still dark outside?" "Because the sun is lazy," I said. "Unlike us." "Come on." I walked down the hall to Rosie's room. She was already sitting up in bed, her reading light on, a book spread open on her lap. That child. She looked up as I pushed the door open, her face lighting up with a bright smile. "Grandpa." The way she said it was the same way Maggie sometimes said my name, like it was a complete sentence all on its own. "You're already up," I said. I woke up at 4:30. I had a dream about the spelling test and just stayed up. She swung her legs over the side of the bed. "Is Cooper awake?" "He is now. Egg sandwiches. Murphy's." Her eyes went wide. "Murphy's." Before I could finish, she was out of bed and passed me down the hall. I stood in the doorway of her room for a moment, looking at the reading light still burning and the open book on the pillow, feeling a tightness in my chest that was almost uncomfortable. A specific kind of love that had nowhere to go except straight into taking care of them. Downstairs, I unwrapped the sandwiches, poured them each a small glass of orange juice while they got dressed, and checked Cooper's backpack for the permission slip. It was there, signed with my name because Diane hadn't gotten to it. Brandon's coffee mug from yesterday morning was sitting in the sink, unwashed. I washed it. At 6:22, I watched the two of them buckle into the back seat of my truck. Rosie had her backpack on her lap, going over her spelling words. Cooper was already halfway through his sandwich. "Grandpa," Cooper said around a mouthful of egg, "do you think clouds have feelings?" "Cooper, chew before you talk," Rosie said without looking up. "I am chewing and talking. It's called multitasking." "It's called gross," Rosie said. "Rosie." I caught her eye in the rearview mirror, and she bit down on a smile. "Sorry," she said, not sounding sorry at all. "Grandpa," Cooper insisted about the clouds. "Do they?" "I think," I said, pulling out onto the main road, "that if clouds had feelings, they'd feel pretty good about themselves. Imagine being that big and getting to float around in the sky all day." Cooper considered this with absolute seriousness. "I'd like that job," he announced. "Me too, buddy," I said. "Me too." At 6:45, I dropped them off in front of the school. Cooper ran straight for the doors without looking back, which was completely on brand for him. Rosie paused at the curb, turned around, and walked 3 steps back to my window. I rolled it down. "Thank you for the sandwich, Grandpa," she said. Then she reached her hand into the window and patted mine, my rough, stained old hand. Just one pat. Then she turned and walked into the school. I sat in the drop-off line for a long moment after she disappeared through the doors. My throat felt tight. I pressed my lips together and blinked hard twice. Then I pulled out of the parking lot and drove toward the shoe shop, because shoes don't fix themselves, and nothing else in this world does either. What I haven't told you yet is that during those early morning drives, I was just beginning to realize the full weight of everything I was carrying. Buying the daily groceries, clearing snow off the driveway in the dark before Brandon had to drive out, signing permission slips, helping with homework, repairing the heating, paying the bills. It had accumulated so gradually that I had stopped seeing it as unusual and simply treated it as the baseline of my life. Brandon hadn't shoveled his own driveway once that winter. Not once. He walked out to work every morning, found the driveway cleared, and never once asked who had done it. That specific detail kept coming back to me on those cold drives home, not with anger, but with a quiet, growing realization that I hadn't yet put a name to. I would put a name to it soon enough. January in Buffalo doesn't ask for permission. Takum. It arrives with a specific kind of arrogance, knowing it can't be argued with, dropping temperatures into the single digits, piling lake-effect snow against the front door, and making the city feel like the last inhabited outpost before the end of the earth. I didn't mind it. I had lived here my whole life. A place that shows you its true face, without pretense, and there was an honesty to that. On the night of January 9th, about an hour after Maggie and I had gone to bed, my phone lit up the nightstand. I grabbed it before the second ring. Maggie stirred beside me, but didn't wake. The name on the screen was Diane. 11:14 p.m. My chest tightened before I even answered. Diane. My voice was flat and clear. Years of early mornings made me the kind of person who was fully alert the second my eyes opened. Dad. Her voice was thin, strained with panic. The furnace broke. It just made a noise and stopped, and now it won't turn on at all. It's 22 degrees outside, and the house is already getting cold. The kids. How long ago? I was already sitting up, my feet on the floor. About 40 minutes. I've been trying to restart it, but I don't know what I'm doing. Brandon? She paused. A brief pause, but I heard everything in it. Brandon isn't feeling well. He's upstairs. In that pause, I understood that Brandon wasn't sick. Brandon just didn't want to go out in 22-degree weather at 11:15 at night. I didn't say that to my daughter. Are the kids awake? I asked. Cooper woke up about 10 minutes ago. He's cold. I put him in Rosie's room with a small space heater from my closet, but it's too small. And I'm on my way, I said. Keep that little heater clear of any curtains and get them both extra blankets. I'll call you when I'm 15 minutes out. I hung up. Maggie was awake now, watching me from her side of the bed, her gray hair spread across the pillow. What is it? She asked. Diane's furnace died, I said, pulling on my thermal pants. Maggie pushed herself up. I'm coming with you. Stay put. I placed my hand on her shoulder, feeling her warmth through her flannel gown. Your knees are acting up. Stay in the warm bed. I can handle it. Before I could stand up straight, she caught my wrist. Despite her arthritis, her grip was still surprisingly firm. Ed, be careful on the roads. I'm always careful. You drive like a man who still thinks he's 50, she said. But her eyes were full of worry. So I bent down and kissed her forehead. I'll call you when it's sorted out, I said. When I opened the back door, the cold hit me like a solid wall. The phone said 12 degrees, and the weather app listed the wind chill as feeling like 4 below. Husti. Which sounded about right, though words didn't quite capture how it bit at your skin. My truck had been sitting for 2 hours. The engine turned over reluctantly, looking annoyed with me. I quickly scraped the windshield, my fingers stinging inside my gloves, and drove out onto Elmwood Avenue. The Home Depot on Sheridan Drive was one of the few places open past 11 p.m. I knew that because this wasn't the first time I had needed something at an unreasonable hour. I found a portable electric heater rated for 1,500 square feet, enough to cover their main living area, and carried it to the register myself without waiting for help. $47.62. I paid cash. At 11:48 p.m., I was back in the truck, heading onto the highway. Diane met me at the front door wearing her coat inside the house, which told me the temperature was dropping faster than I had hoped. Dad. She grabbed my arm the moment I walked in, Her face was tight with equal parts, relief and guilt. "Thank you. I'm so sorry for calling you this late. I just didn't know. What? Go check on the kids," I said, seeing that her nerves were shot, which wasn't helping anyone. "I'll take a look at the furnace." The basement stairs were right off the kitchen. I found the light switch, walked down, and stood in front of the unit with a flashlight for 3 full minutes before I fully processed what I was looking at. The pilot light was out, which I could have relit. But when I checked the igniter, I saw the real problem. The heat exchanger was cracked. That meant the unit couldn't be turned back on tonight, and likely never again. A cracked heat exchanger would leak carbon monoxide right into the living quarters. Years ago, a customer had told me about losing relatives to something like that. I wasn't going to light anything. I headed back upstairs. Diane was in the kitchen, pulling her coat tight around herself. "Tell me, it's the heat exchanger," I said. "It's cracked. You can't run it. Even if it starts, carbon monoxide could leak into the house." Her face went pale. "Then, what are we supposed to do?" "That's why I bought this," I said, holding up the box. "It runs on electricity. It's strong enough for the main floor. Get some blankets, bring the kids into the living room, plug this in, and they'll be warm enough until you can get a heating company out tomorrow." "Dad, I can't let you." "You didn't ask me to," I said. "I'm already here. Tell me where you want it set up." I set up the heater in the living room, running the cord safely along the baseboard and making sure the outlet could handle the draw. Then, I went back down to the basement to properly disconnect the gas line to the old unit, making sure there was 0 chance of an accidental restart overnight. When I came back upstairs, Rosie and Cooper were sitting on the couch wrapped in a mountain of blankets, the electric heater humming warmly in the corner. Cooper was half asleep, his cheek resting against his sister's shoulder. Rosie watched me with those serious dark eyes. "Is it fixed, Grandpa?" she asked. "It's handled," I said. While not entirely the same thing, it was close enough for 11:30 on a Wednesday night. Rosie nodded. "Thank you," she said with a gravity that belonged to someone 3 times her age. I ruffled her hair, and she accepted it with only a mild protest. At 1:23 a.m., Brandon appeared at the top of the stairs. I knew the exact time because I looked at my watch when I heard his footsteps. He was wearing a t-shirt and sweatpants, squinting against the hallway light. He looked down into the living room, saw me crouching by the heater doing a final check, and said, "You got it running." His voice was completely flat. No relief, no gratitude. Not a shred of appreciation for his father-in-law, standing in his house at 1 a.m. in January, because he had chosen not to come downstairs himself. I stood up slowly, my knees protesting against the cold as usual. I looked at him. "The old furnace is done," I said. "This new one runs on electricity. It'll hold the temperature tonight. Get someone out here this week to replace the main unit. Do not, under any circumstances, try to turn the old one back on." Brandon gave a single nod, then turned and walked back toward the bedroom. No thank you, no offer to see me out. Nothing. Just the sound of his footsteps retreating back to the warm room he had been in the whole time. Diane walked me to the door. She looked like she wanted to say something, whatever it was, hovering right on the surface. But she pressed her lips together, and all that came out was, "Drive safe, Dad." "I will," I said. I drove home in the dark. The roads were deserted. The heater in my truck worked fine, which felt like a small miracle worth being grateful for at that particular moment. Maggie had left a light on in the kitchen. I came in through the back door, hung up my coat, and sat down at the kitchen table. My knees were aching. My hands were stiff from the cold. The clock on the microwave read 2:17 a.m. At 2:23, Maggie came downstairs in her robe. She had been awake the whole time, despite me telling her to sleep. Without a word, she set a cup of tea in front of me and sat down across the table. She looked at my face for a long time, reading it with the exact precision she always had, a skill that never ceased to amaze me. "Did he come downstairs?" she asked. I wrapped my hands around the mug, letting the heat sink through my palms into my fingers. "Eventually," I said. Asked if the heat was back on. Maggie pressed her lips into a thin line, her jaw tight. Then she reached across the table and placed her hands over mine, squeezing them firm. "Ed," she said, her voice carrying something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite sadness, but somewhere right in between. "How long are we going to keep doing this?" I looked down at our hands on the table, my rough, stained hands alongside her small ones with their swollen knuckles that never complained. "As long as we need to," I said. But, sitting in that kitchen at 2 in the morning, with the cold still lingering in my bones and the image of Brandon turning his back to walk away, I felt the very first hairline fracture in that answer. Not a break, not yet. Just the beginning of a crack, and in the months to come, I would learn that tiny cracks always spread. The morning of March 4th started like every other Tuesday. Alarm at 4:45 a.m., coffee in the dark, thermal underwear, flannel shirt, Carhartt jacket, scraping the ice off the truck windshield while my breath turned to fog in the freezing air. Then driving through the empty streets to Murphy's Bakery on Kenmore Avenue for those 2 usual egg sandwiches. Cooper was harder to wake up than usual that morning. He had stayed up past his bedtime reading comic books under the covers with a flashlight. Rosie turned him in the second I walked through the door, carrying the satisfied look of someone who had waited all night just to deliver that specific piece of information. "Cooper James Hurst," I said, standing by his bed, one eye opened. "She told you?" "Yep." "Traitor," he muttered toward the wall sharing his sister's room. "Sandwiches," I said. He sat up instantly. 7-year-olds aren't complicated. By 6:15, both kids were buckled into the back seat. Rosie was going through her vocabulary flashcards. Cooper was working on his sandwich, with the concentration of a man defusing a bomb. The truck heater was running on high, and the radio was broadcasting traffic updates for a city that was just waking up. We turned onto Maple Road at 6:03 a.m. I knew the exact time because the radio announcer had just said it. A cheerful morning host saying, 6:03 a.m., 1 degree out there, with a light breeze off the lake. Just then, I saw it. Brandon's car, that dark blue Audi. He washed it every Saturday without fail, and it was parked in his garage every night. But there it was, sitting right on the curb in front of 14 Maple Road, right in front of Natalie Voss's house. I noticed it the way your brain registers something it doesn't actually want to process. First the color, then the model, and then the license plate. I recognized the plate immediately because 2 years ago, when Brandon forgot to renew it, I was the one who helped Diane sort out the registration paperwork. 6:03 a.m. Brandon had told Diane he was going downtown early to meet a client. As I watched, the front door of number 14 opened. Brandon stepped out, zip-up jacket already on, keys in hand. Then Natalie Voss appeared in the doorway behind him. She was wearing a robe, a short one, resting one hand on the doorframe, smiling at him. It wasn't a neighborly smile. It wasn't the polite wave of an acquaintance who happened to live on the same street. The traffic light turned green. "Grandpa," Why are we stopped? Cooper asked. My foot found the gas pedal. Just making sure the road's clear, buddy, I said. My voice was completely steady. I don't know how I managed that. I watched them in the rearview mirror for 2 full seconds before the bend in the road carried them out of sight. Rosie looked up from her flashcards. She caught my eye in the mirror with those sharp, watchful eyes of hers. For one horrible second, I thought she had seen it too. But then she looked back down at her card and said, asymptote. A line that a curve approaches continuously, but never quite meets. That's right, I said. At 6:41, I dropped them off at school. Cooper sprinted toward the gates. Rosie paused, turned around, and looked at me through the passenger window. Are you okay, Grandpa? She asked. You got real quiet. Just thinking about the shop, I said. Go learn something new. She gave me a long, knowing look, the kind that felt uncomfortably similar to how Maggie looked at me whenever she knew I wasn't telling the whole truth. Then she adjusted her backpack and walked into the building. I pulled out of the school parking lot, drove exactly 4 blocks, and pulled onto a side street. I put the truck in park. I sat there for a long time. The heater hummed. The radio kept playing, bright and completely indifferent, spinning some song I didn't recognize. Outside, a woman, walking a golden retriever, passed my window without giving the truck a second glance. I thought about Diane's voice on the phone back in January, small and panicked. The furnace broke, Dad. I thought about the groceries I bought every Wednesday and Saturday to keep their fridge full. I thought about the permission slip sitting on my passenger seat. I thought about Rose on the school steps, Cooper in the back seat asking about clouds, and then that smile in the doorway of number 14. I called Maggie. She picked up on the second ring, already awake, already sitting at the kitchen table with her coffee. How are the kids? She asked. Fine, I said. Cooper wanted to sleep in. Rosie's working through her vocabulary cards. Asymptote, Maggie said immediately, because Rosie had called her grandmother the night before to practice. That's the one, I said. A beat of silence hung over the line. Maggie understood my silences the way a musician understands pauses on a sheet of music. Not as an absence, but as a specific kind of sound. Ed, she asked gently. What happened? Nothing, I said. Just a long morning. I'll be at the shop by 7:30. I heard her breathe on the other end of the line. She didn't push. That was what I loved most about Maggie. She knew when to push and when to hold her ground. That morning, she chose to hold her ground. I'll have coffee ready, she said. Thanks, I said. Then, because I needed to say something true to someone, I added, Maggie, everything's fine. I just need a couple of quiet minutes. Take 2 minutes then, she said. The shoes can wait. I hung up. I sat with my hands on the wheel for another 5 minutes. Outside, the golden retriever and its owner came jogging back down the sidewalk. The dog trotted along with endless optimisms. A creature that had never checked a license plate at 6 in the morning, never felt its understanding of the world suddenly shift under its feet. In that moment, I envied that dog terribly. The following Tuesday, I turned onto Maple Road at 6:04 a.m. The blue Audi was there again. The Tuesday after that, 6:02 a.m., still there. After the 4th week, I stopped checking because it was starting to feel like pressing on a bruise. I knew what I had seen. Repeating it was just confirming it, over and over. I didn't tell Diane. Every time I drove past that house, I did the exact same math. If I told her now, with nothing more than what I had seen through a truck window, Brandon would deny it. Diane would break down. And the only person who would look like a troublemaker in the whole mess was me. I needed real evidence. What I didn't know yet was that back home, Maggie, with her swollen knuckles, cold coffee, and reading glasses, had already started gathering what I needed. People always underestimated Maggie. She was small, standing barely 5'2" on a good day, and arthritis had hunched her shoulders over the last few years, making her look even smaller. She moved carefully now, especially in the mornings, when her knees were stiff. She had learned to navigate the house in a strict sequence: kitchen counter, center island, back of the chair. So, she could get from the bedroom to the coffee maker without putting too much weight on her right side. People saw that careful movement and saw frailty. They missed the mind behind it. Sharp as a brand new awl, and precise as a ruler. It happened on a Friday afternoon in April. I was at the shop. Maggie had gone over to Diane's to watch Rosie and Cooper while Diane ran errands. It was something she did every other Friday because Diane's work schedule made after-school pickups complicated. Cooper had set his old tablet against the fruit bowl on the kitchen island, watching a loud cartoon about animated animals. Rosie was at the kitchen table reading a chapter book. Maggie was cutting apple slices at the counter, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, moving at the cautious pace her knees demanded. Cooper's tablet chimed with a notification. He ignored it, far too absorbed in his cartoon. It chimed again. "Cooper, your tablet," Rosie said without looking up. "Ugh, it's probably just a game," Cooper said. Maggie glanced at the screen. It wasn't a game. It was a text notification displaying on the lock screen before dimming. The tablet was an old device Brandon had passed down to Cooper, still linked to Brandon's Apple ID through the family sharing plan. Some notifications still pushed through from his account because no one had thought to change the settings. Maggie laid the knife down. She wasn't snooping. It's important you understand that. She picked up the tablet, intending to clear the notification so it wouldn't keep chiming. But as she did, the lock screen lit up again, showing a full preview of the message. In the 2 seconds before the screen went dark, she read it. "Tonight. She's asleep by 10, no name, just a number she didn't recognize." Maggie placed the tablet back beside the fruit bowl, exactly as it had been. She picked up the knife and finished slicing the apples. Her hands remained completely steady, something she took pride in later, because her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her throat. "Grandma," Cooper called from the island, "can I have some of those?" "They're for you, sweetheart," Maggie said. She brought the plate over, ruffled his hair, and walked back to the sink. While running water over her hands, she reached into her cardigan pocket for the small notepad and pen she always carried, a 40-year habit from writing grocery lists. Slowly and meticulously, she wrote down the number, making sure every single digit was exact. Then she tore off the page, folded it once, and slipped it back into her pocket. That night, she told me what she had seen. After dinner, we sat in the kitchen with the dishes washed and the table wiped down. She placed the folded piece of paper on the table between us and smoothed it flat with a finger. "This came up on Cooper's tablet this afternoon," she said. "Brandon's account." I looked at the number, then up at my wife. "Ed, don't tell me it could be something else," she said. Her voice was quiet, but absolutely firm. "I know what this means, and so do you." My jaw tightened. I took a slow breath through my nose. We need to be careful. We can't go to Diane with a phone number written on a piece of paper. "I know," Maggie said. "That's why I'm not going to Diane." She crossed her hands on the table. I'm going to be patient, and I'm going to start paying attention. Because whoever owns this number is probably closer than we think. She was right. As it turned out, it took less than a week for her intuition to pay off. Natalie Voss came over on a Thursday morning holding a plate of lemon bars, wearing a bright smile. She called out Mrs. C. to Maggie like she always did, leaning against the doorframe with her highlighted hair and athletic wear, asking if Maggie needed anything from the grocery store. Maggie smiled and said, "No, thank you." Then she spent 7 minutes talking with her about the weather and Rosie's upcoming school play. After Natalie left, Maggie walked inside, sat at the kitchen table, and wrote the name right under the phone number in her notepad. The following week, she asked our neighbor Ruth, a sharp-eyed retired teacher who walked twice a day right past Diane Street, if she had noticed anything unusual around the neighborhood lately. Ruth had. "Oh, that pretty blonde over on Maple," Ruth said over coffee at our kitchen table. "I've seen Brandon Hurst's car parked at her place a few times in the morning. Early. I figured it wasn't my business." Maggie placed her hand over Ruth's. "If you see it again, would you take a picture?" Ruth looked at her for a moment, then said, "I take my walks at 6 in the morning. I always have my phone with me." "Thank you," Maggie said. 3 weeks later, Ruth had 4 photos, time-stamped, license plate clearly visible, showing Brandon walking out of number 14's front door. Maggie slipped them into a manila envelope. Then came the hotel receipt. She found it under a couch cushion while helping Diane clean up before a dinner party. The kind of thing that easily slips out of a jacket pocket. The receipt was from a hotel on Niagara Falls Boulevard. Dated February, charged to Brandon's personal credit card rather than their joint account. Her knees throbbed terribly while she was crouched by that sofa, but she didn't stop. She took a photo of the receipt with her phone, slid the original back where she found it, and used the arm of the couch to pull herself up, her face tight from the exertion. "You okay, Mom?" Diane called from the kitchen. "Fine," Maggie replied, adjusting her cardigan. "Just checking if you dropped an earring down here." That night, she added the photo of the hotel receipt to the manila envelope. She didn't tell me about the envelope until she had gathered everything she needed. One evening, when she finally laid it out on our kitchen table, I looked through the contents and felt something cold and dead settle in my chest. "How long?" I asked. "Since April," she said. I reached across the table and covered her swollen, careful, extraordinary hands with mine. I felt a lump in my throat that I couldn't swallow down. "Maggie," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. "Don't you dare pity me," she said, her eyes fierce and bright. "Save that for Diane, and let's figure out how we're going to handle this." I squeezed her hand tight. She squeezed back with surprising strength, enough to make my own knuckles ache. Outside in the backyard, the first fireflies of summer were starting to drift around. Through the window, I could see them flickering in the dark, flying over the garden that Maggie couldn't kneel to tend anymore because of her bad knees, though she still directed me through it every weekend. She always walked beside me, pointing out what needed trimming. Together, the two of us had built something real, quiet, and worth protecting. I was beginning to understand that protecting it was going to require more than just patience. Since October, the gutter on the north side of Brandon's house had come loose from the fascia board. I had first noticed it back in the fall, while dropping off groceries, looking up out of habit as I walked out. The kind of habit you form when you spent a lifetime noticing things that needed fixing. The bracket was loose, likely damaged by ice from the previous winter, and the whole section was sagging outward at a steep angle. It was bound to tear away completely come spring. I mentioned it to Diane in November, and she said she'd tell Brandon. I brought it up again in December, and she said he'd been busy. By May, I brought my telescoping ladder down off the truck rack and fixed it myself. Brandon was home that Saturday. While I stood on the third rung from the top, securing the bracket and running a fresh line of exterior sealant along the seam, he stepped out onto the back deck holding a mug of coffee. "Since you're up there," he called up, "check the flashing on the left side too. I think it's coming up." "No." "Good morning." No offer to hold the ladder, just an instruction, delivered in the tone of a boss adding another task to a worker's checklist. I checked the flashing. It was coming up. I secured it. I didn't say a word. On my way down, my right knee gave out slightly on the second-to-last rung. It had started doing that in cold weather. A minor betrayal I chose to ignore for as long as possible. I grabbed the side rail, lowering myself safely to the ground. By then, Brandon had already gone back inside. As I was loading the ladder back onto the truck rack, Diane came out the front door. "Dad." She held her keys in hand, a look of quiet guilt written across her face that she tried to hide behind a smile. "You didn't have to do that. The gutter would have been fine until the next rain." "I know," I said. She touched my arm briefly. "Thank you. Really." Then her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and the guilty look dissolved into distraction. "I have to take Rosie to her friend's birthday party. Cooper's inside watching TV." "Go ahead," I said. "I'll lock up when I leave." She was already walking toward her car. "There's iced tea in the fridge," she called, over her shoulder. I secured the ladder and went inside to wash my hands. The kitchen was quiet. Cooper was on the sofa in the next room, cartoons playing softly on the TV. I turned on the hot water and used the dish soap sitting by the sink to wash the grease from the sealant off my fingers. It was the same brand Maggie used, and for some reason, that made my chest feel tighter than it should have. Through the kitchen window, I had a clear view down the front walkway. Natalie Voss was walking down the street in her workout clothes, headphones around her neck, letting one arm hang loosely at her side. That specific posture people adopt when they're self-conscious about something new on their wrist. A bracelet, gold and delicate, catching the May morning sun. I turned off the tap. Just the week before, Diane had called me. "Dad, I hate to ask again, but we're a little short on Rosie's spring tuition. Private school has the second installment due in May, and with everything lately, I had told her not to worry about it." That afternoon, $800 was transferred into their joint account. I dried my hands on the dish towel by the sink. Natalie paused at the end of the driveway to check her phone. The bracelet caught the light again. "I'm not a man who knows jewelry prices, but I've been on this earth for 70 years, and I know the difference between a $40 department store piece and something far more expensive. I know the weight of quality when I see it." That bracelet had real weight. My stomach turned cold. That evening, I had Maggie look something up on her phone. I described the bracelet as accurately as I could. The style of the chain, the clasp, the small reflective pendant in the middle. Maggie spent 11 minutes on a jewelry retailer's website before finding it. $700 I had transferred $800. Afterward, I sat in the chair by the front window for a long time. Outside, the evening routine played out on the street as it always did. Kids on bicycles, a couple walking their dog, the Kowalski grandkids chasing each other across their front lawn. Normal life, indifferent and ongoing. I pulled a small brown notebook from my shirt pocket. I had been carrying it since February, when I first realized I was going to need a record. I wrote down the date, the amount I had transferred, and the line below it. Gold bracelet. NV, Natalie Voss. Approximately $795. I looked at what I had written, cleared my throat, and flipped back a few pages to review everything else. 41 grocery runs since September, averaging $60 to $80 each time. The furnace repair, $47 for the electric heater, plus 4 hours of my labor at 2 a.m. Gutter repairs, $12 in materials. 2 hours standing on a ladder with a bad knee. An estimated 23 early mornings spending 90 minutes clearing snow from their driveway. Signing permission slips, helping with homework, after school, pickups when Diane ran late. And the $800 now wrapped around Natalie Voss's wrist. I closed the notebook. Ed, Maggie's voice came from the kitchen doorway. Psst. She had that expression on her face, the one where she already knew what I was thinking, but wanted me to say it out loud, because she believed in calling things what they were. He took the money, I said. Yes, she said, for school tuition. Yes. I stood up from the chair. Climbing that ladder earlier had left my knees aching, and my hands felt heavy, like my arms could barely hold them up. Maggie, every time I go over to repair something at his house, he looks me right in the face. He watched me climb that ladder this morning. I know, she said. He even called down from the deck to have me check the flashing while I was up there. My voice remained steady, but it was pushing right up against the edge. And he's taking my money to buy. Ed. Maggie crossed the room and took my face in both of her hands, those small, arthritic hands that had held me up for 42 years. She looked straight into my eyes. Listen to me. We are going to handle this, but we are going to handle it the right way. Not today, not tomorrow, when the time is right. Her thumbs pressed gently against my jaw. Can you hold on a little longer? I placed my hands over hers, my throat burning. I've been waiting 17 years for them to treat me like a human being in that house, I said. Maggie's eyes were fierce and tender all at once. You matter, she said. You have always mattered. And very soon, Edmund Calloway, everyone in that house is going to realize exactly how much you matter. Outside, the Kowalski kids let out a burst of screaming laughter over something. The mundane evening continued, as it always did, right up until the moment it didn't. Rosie's birthday invitation arrived in our mailbox 4 days later. Diane sent the text on a Thursday evening while I was closing up the shop. I had just switched off the front display lights, polishing cloth still in hand, when the phone buzzed on the stool beside me. Dad, Rosie's birthday party is Saturday the 6th. Brandon invited some clients from work, so there will be more people than usual. Hope you and Mom can make it. Starts at 2 p.m. I read it, twice. Not please come, not we'd love to have you. Just, hope you can make it, the way you'd notify someone on an email list, I replied. We'll be there. What time should we bring food over? 3 minutes passed. Oh, don't worry about that. Brandon hired a catering service. I put the phone in my pocket and finished wiping down the workbench. I told Maggie that night. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her reading glasses slid halfway down her nose, her tea gone cold beside her as usual. Saturday the 6th, I said. Rosie's birthday. Brandon's making a big deal out of it. His clients are coming. Maggie laid her pen down. Clients? She said in a flat tone, that contained every word she was choosing not to say out loud. "I want to finish the shoes," I said. At the mention of her granddaughter, her expression shifted the way it always did. "How many stitches left?" 31. "Then get to it," she said, picking her pen back up. "I'm making an apple pie. Maggie, you don't have to do that. Edmund." She looked at me over her glasses, with the expression that had ended roughly 4,000 conversations over 42 years of marriage. "Rosie has asked me for that pie every single birthday since she was 4. I am not showing up to her 10th birthday party without it. Now go stitch your shoes." So I did, 3 nights in a row, staying at the workbench long after closing. I used a 2mm saddle stitch, double needle, threading each pass carefully, locking every stitch into the previous one, so that even if one thread broke, the rest would hold. Rosie ran hard, and these shoes needed to last. When the stitching was complete, I smoothed the edges with a bone folder, conditioned the leather with beeswax, and polished them by hand. Then I stamped her name inside. Rosie in clean capital and lowercase letters pressed deep into the lining above the heel, built to stay for years. Beneath the insole, using the smallest lettering set I owned, I stamped, "Walk with kindness wherever you go." I placed both shoes under the lamp and looked at them side by side. My chest filled with something difficult to put a simple name to. Pride, love, and, beneath both, a quiet resolve I didn't examine too closely. I wrapped them in brown paper, tied them with twine, and set them inside an old dark green shoebox stamped with gold lettering. On top of the lid, in clean print, I wrote, "Rosie." On the morning of Saturday, July 6th, Maggie was up before me. When I came downstairs at 6:30, the apple pie was already in the oven. Cinnamon, brown sugar, and Cortland apples. The only variety Maggie had used for 42 years and never once thought about changing. Even now, the smell of it made my eyes sting slightly. "You didn't sleep," I said. "The crust needed to rest overnight," she said, navigating her fixed path through the kitchen. Counter, island, chair back, to avoid the pain in her knees. "Sit down. I'll pour your coffee." I sat. I watched the morning light catch the silver in her hair, and just like 10,000 mornings before, I felt like the luckiest man in Buffalo. "New York, how's the knee?" I asked. "Bothering me like always," she said, sitting across from me. Which is another way of saying not great. She held her cup in both hands. "Ed, I want to talk about today." "All right," I said. "Whatever happens over there, remember one thing. We are going for Rosie. Not for Brandon, not for his clients, and not to prove anything to anyone. We are going because that little girl is turning 10, and she wants her grandparents there." She held my eyes. "Can you remember that?" "Yes," I said, satisfied. She gave a nod and picked up her crossword puzzle. "Good. Now help me with 7 across. 9 letters. Persistence. Endurance. Persevere," I said. She counted on her fingers and wrote it in. "How do you always get these?" 45 years of practice," I said. We dressed in our best clothes. Me in my navy suit, pressed by Maggie the night before, with the slow, careful attention she gave to everything that mattered. She wore her blue dress with the small white flowers and the pearl earrings I had given her for our 30th anniversary. She looked beautiful. She had always been beautiful, and I had never stopped noticing it. I tucked the shoebox under my arm. Maggie carried the pie. On the drive to Amherst, Maggie told me something Rosie had said the month before while practicing her vocabulary words. She said the word luminist. Sounded exactly like what it meant. When Maggie shared that, She let out that deep laugh from her chest, and I couldn't help but laugh along with her. For 20 minutes in that truck, I felt genuinely, completely happy. I didn't know it would be the last moment for a long time where my mind felt completely unburdened. At 1:55 p.m., we pulled into the driveway. Before I even opened the door, I could hear voices and music. Walking around to the back of the house, I saw about 40 or 50 sharply dressed people gathered in clusters around a catered spread and a bar Brandon had set up along the fence line. Maggie's hand slipped onto my arm. I covered her hand with mine. "Ready?" she asked. "Ready," I said. We walked in together. Less than 30 seconds after we arrived, Brandon spotted us. He was standing with a group of men near the catering table, one hand in his pocket, holding a glass of clear liquor in the other. The relaxed posture of a man who had arranged everything around him exactly to his liking. When he saw me, his expression shifted. It wasn't outright hostility, but more like how someone looks when they spot an item that doesn't fit the rest of the room's decor. He walked across the yard toward us, putting on a smile and extending his hand. "Ed." 2 firm shakes. "Glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it," I said. He turned to Maggie. "Margaret, you look lovely." "Thank you, Brandon," Maggie replied in the tone peculiar to women who had perfected the art of telling the absolute truth over 42 years. His eyes drifted to the shoebox tucked under my arm. A flash of mockery crossed his face before he managed to suppress it. "What do you have there?" "Rosie's present," I said. He tilted his head, looking at the dark green box with its gold lettering and my handwritten capital letters spelling out. "Rosie." "A shoebox," he said pleasantly, using a tone meant to sound like a simple observation, though it landed like a judgment. "That's different." 2 clients standing nearby overheard. One of them offered a polite, mocking smile at the box, the kind of smile that spreads easily through a crowd. My jaw tightened. Maggie's hand pressed firmly against my arm, a brief, solid squeeze. "It is different," I said. "I made them." Brandon blinked. "You made them. Shoes. For 45 years," I said. "It's what I do." Diane emerged from the house, walking quickly with the flushed face of someone managing too many things at once. She kissed Maggie's cheek, then mine, her eyes darting between us and Brandon like a lookout, watching 2 weather systems converge. "Food's over by the back fence," she said. "Can I get you 2 something to drink?" "In a bit," Maggie said. "Where's our birthday girl?" "Over by the bounce house with her friends." Diane's phone vibrated. She frowned. "Give me 2 minutes. Help yourselves to whatever you want. Anything at all." I looked around the yard. Every table in the center was packed with Brandon's clients, men and women sharply dressed, sharing the easy laughter of people accustomed to holding the main table at every event. Off to the side, near the kitchen door, sat 2 smaller folding tables, set up with plastic chairs. Diane reappeared beside me, her face carrying the cautious expression of someone preparing to deliver bad news. "Mom, Dad, would you mind sitting over there for now?" She pointed to the folding table closest to the kitchen door. "Brandon's clients are spread out, and it's getting a little crowded up front, just for a little while." Maggie's hand tightened on my arm, a fraction of an inch from snapping. "Just a fraction." "Sure," I said. The relief in Diane's voice was genuine, which told me she had anticipated pushback and was grateful not to receive any. That detail pressed down on my chest like a heavy stone. We carried our things to the back table, setting the shoebox down on the plastic tablecloth, the pie box right beside it. We sat down. Natalie Voss sat at another table in the distance, holding a glass of white wine. That gold bracelet caught the bright afternoon sun. One of her arms was draped around Diane's shoulder. Diane was laughing, carrying the open warmth that only comes when you are laughing with a trusted friend. When you are laughing, my stomach churned tight. Beside me, Maggie took a long, slow breath through her nose. "Don't go over there," I whispered. "I wasn't planning on it," she said. But her hands, folded on the table, pressed together so hard, her knuckles turned white. Then, out of nowhere, Cooper came charging across the yard with all the momentum of a 7-year-old boy seeing facing his favorite person nearly knocking the pie right off the table. "Grandpa!" He threw his arms around my neck. "You came. I didn't even know you were here." I wrapped my arms around him, feeling some of the weight in my chest dissolve. "We just got here. Buddy, where were you?" "The bounce house." He pulled back, his face flushed red with pure joy. "Grandma, did you bake apple pie?" Maggie's voice softened completely. "Made it special for you and Rosie." Cooper's eyes went wide. "Can I have some after we cut the cake?" "What if you ate pie instead of cake?" Maggie asked. "Then I'd be the smartest person at this party," Cooper declared. Maggie chuckled. Then Cooper scrambled onto the chair next to her, pressing close to her side. She wrapped her arm around him, holding him tight. I watched the tension in her jaw ease the second she felt his warm weight leaning against her. This was why we had come. 20 minutes passed. The party continued around us the way events do when you sit on the margins, present but sidelined, visible but unincluded. Brandon moved smoothly through the crowd. His clients laughed loudly. A young waiter stopped by our table, his expression uncertain, as if he hadn't been told anyone would be sitting back here. "Can I get you folks anything?" "Whatever you've got is fine," I said. I laid my hands flat on the table. I watched Natalie Voss laughing with my daughter. I did what I had always done in front of Brandon Hurst: absorb, store, and wait. Then, from across the yard, "Grandpa!" Rosie came running. Not the measured stride of a 10-year-old trying to act grown up, but the full-speed sprint she had used when she was 6, 7, 8. Arms pumping, hair flying loose. Her face held a shine of pure, unmixed joy that made my throat tighten. She collided with me, throwing both arms around my neck. "You're here," she said against my shoulder. "I was looking for you. I couldn't find you." "We've been right here, sweetheart," I said, my voice coming out rougher than I meant it to. She pulled back, looked down at the shoebox, and then turned those sharp, knowing eyes up at me. "Is that for me?" "That's for you," I said. She reached out, her fingers brushing the twine. Right then, Brandon arrived. It took him 8 steps to cross the yard. I counted them because when an event burns into your memory, those are the details that stick. From where he stood with his clients to where Rosie stood by our table with her hands on the string, exactly 8 steps. "Rosie." His voice was flat, carrying clearly across the grass. "Get back to the main table. Your friends are waiting for you." Rosie looked back at her father, her fingers still resting on the twine. "I want to open Grandpa's present first. You can open it later." He covered the remaining distance, placed a hand on her shoulder, and steered her away from our table. The movement wasn't gentle. Rosie stumbled, her feet making an awkward shuffle on the grass. I stood up slowly, deliberately, the way a man with a bad knee reminds himself to take care. "Brandon, she just got over here. Let her stay a minute." He turned. His face held the look of a man who had been searching for an excuse to explode and had just found it. She needs to be with her guests, he said. She is with her grandparents, I said. That counts too. Something flickered across his face, a decision being made. Do you know what your problem is, Ed? He kept his voice low, but not low enough. A couple of pairs at the nearest table paused. You show up everywhere, acting like your opinion actually matters around here. Brandon. Diane's voice came from my left. She was walking toward us, carrying the watchful expression she wore whenever we were near each other. Brandon didn't look at her. You're a cobbler, he said. You fix shoes for a living. You drive up here in your beat-up truck, and act like that makes you somebody. My hands rested at my sides. My heart beat slow and heavy, and through 45 years of practice, I kept my face entirely still. Brandon, stop, Diane said, reaching for his arm. He brushed her off, his eyes fixed on mine. You're nobody, just an old man with shoe polish on his hands who doesn't know when he isn't wanted. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, very quietly, don't speak to me like that in front of my grandchildren. And then Brandon Hurst swung his right hand and slapped me straight across the left side of my face. The sound was worse than the pain. A sharp, crackling pop that echoed through the yard like glass shattering. For the next half-second, the entire party fell dead silent. I heard Maggie gasp in her chair behind me. Rosie let out a small, broken sound. Brandon's chest heaved, his face flushed deep red. Who do you think you are? His voice trembled, not with regret, but with fury. The anger of a man who had done something irreversible and decided to double down to cover it up. An old shoe fixer telling me how to raise my kids. You make a living patching boots. You have no right. Standing in my yard, giving orders. I didn't raise a hand to my cheek. The pain was real enough, a sharp, spreading sting. But I stood my ground, looking at Brandon Hurst, completely still. Diane stepped between us, shaking, her face pale, her hands spread wide. Brandon, that's enough. He started it, Brandon said. Undermining me in my own home for 6 years. I'm done with it. Dad. Diane turned to me, her eyes filled with tears, her voice cracking down the middle. Dad, please, please don't make a scene. It's Rosie's birthday. Please, just let it go. I looked at my daughter. The slap had hurt, my face burned, but what Diane said hurt in a place that had nothing to do with nerve endings. It was the specific pain of a parent watching their child choose the wrong side and say it out loud in front of everyone. Let it go. As if I were the one who had done something wrong that needed letting go. I turned away from Diane. Not out of anger, but because I had something far more important to take care of than standing there as a spectacle. Maggie had already pushed herself up from her chair. She braced her weight against her chair. A movement that clearly against the table, a movement that clearly took immense effort. Her face was set tight, her right knee giving way slightly, her hands gripping the edge of the table to stay upright. Her eyes burned with something far stronger than fear. I covered the distance between us in 3 steps, putting my arm around her waist and supporting her elbow. She grabbed the front of my jacket tightly. Ed. Her voice shook. I've got you, I said. I picked up the shoebox with my free hand. I didn't look at Brandon. I didn't look at the 50 people standing in that yard. I looked at Maggie's face, and I walked her toward the gate. Cooper stood 6 feet away, frozen, carrying that face children get right before they break down when they haven't decided if it's safe to cry yet. He looked up at me with wide eyes. Grandpa, he whispered. Are you okay? I crouched down, my bad knee screaming. I'm okay, buddy. Be good, and I'll talk to you real soon. His chin trembled. He threw his arms around my neck, holding on for 3 solid seconds. Then pulled back, clenching his teeth in a way that looked terribly like Maggie. In that moment, my heart broke clean in two. Rosie stood by the fence. She hadn't moved since the slap. Her face held a mix of shock, fury, and a grief far too heavy for a 10-year-old child. She held her hands squeezed together in front of her, as if forcing herself to stay still. I looked at her. She looked at me. I gave her a single nod. She pressed her lips together tight. Her eyes shone bright with tears, but she refused to let a single one fall in front of her father's guests. It was the bravest thing I saw all day, braver than anything I did. I helped Maggie out through the gate to the truck, helped her into the passenger seat, placed the shoebox on the back bench, and started the engine. We drove away from that house, and for a long time, neither of us said a word. But when we finally to each other mattered far more than anything that had happened. Anything that had happened in that yard. The street outside Brandon's house carried the usual look of a July Saturday afternoon. Sprinklers arcing across front lawns, a kid on a bike weaving around a parked van, someone's wind chimes tinkling in the light breeze off the lake. A neighborhood completely unaware of what had just taken place 40 feet away, moving forward in plain, unbothered continuity. I kept both hands on the wheel, heading south on Transit Road. The shoebox sat on the back seat, my wife sitting beside me in the passenger seat, completely silent. My left cheek still burned from Brandon's hand. I didn't touch it. Maggie spoke first. We were 3 blocks away from the house. Ed. Her voice was cautious, low, like she was handling something fragile. How bad is it? It's fine, I said. Don't do that. She turned in her seat to look straight at me. The corners of her eyes were red. Not from crying. Maggie didn't cry easily. But from the strain of holding back something massive. Don't tell me it's fine when I was sitting 4 feet away. My face is fine, I said. That part's fine. She understood the distinction. She turned back toward the windshield. Outside, the traffic light shifted from green to yellow to red, and I brought the truck to a stop behind a wagon, with a kayak strapped to the roof. She didn't say anything, Maggie said. It wasn't a question. No, I said. The light turned green. She said, please don't make a scene, I said, keeping my voice steady through sheer effort. She said it was Rosie's birthday. Maggie let out a long, measured breath through her nose. Her right hand, resting on her lap, slowly squeezed into a fist, then deliberately uncurled finger by finger. Oh, Diane, she said finally. She spoke without anger or disappointment, carrying only the exhausted grief of a mother who loves her child but cannot fix her choices. Hearing that voice brought a tightness to my throat that was hard to keep under control. She's scared now, I said. She's been scared for a long time. Being scared doesn't make it right. No, I said. It doesn't. We didn't talk for the rest of the drive. Not because we had nothing to say, but because some conversations require a kitchen table and a warm drink to be said properly. At 3:41 p.m., I pulled into our driveway on Elmwood Avenue. The shop was closed and dark. The front garden Maggie directed me to tend every weekend held the quiet beauty of a well-kept late afternoon. Her black-eyed Susans along the fence were in full bloom. I walked around to Maggie's side and opened her door. She took my hand as she stepped down, and once she was standing on the driveway, she didn't let go right away. She held my hand with both of hers, looking up at my face. It's going to leave a mark, she said. I've had worse, I said. Not from family, she said. The words landed with exact precision. Inside the house, I sat at the kitchen table while Maggie moved through her sequence to the stove to boil water. The kitchen smelled of morning coffee, and the faint scent of the apple pie she had taken to a party that hadn't deserved it. The pie was still in the truck. I had forgotten it. We both had. The pie, I said. Leave it in the truck, Maggie said. I'll make another one. For people who deserve it. I put my elbows on the table and buried my face in my hands. Not because I was breaking down, but because I needed 30 seconds out of sight to find the place deep inside where I stored everything I didn't want to show. Maggie set a cup of tea in front of me and sat down across the table. She slid the sugar bowl toward me, even though she knew I drank my tea plain. It was a 42-year habit of offering sugar that I had never corrected because I found it too sweet to change. Tell me what you're thinking, she said. I wrapped my hands around the mug. I'm thinking about Cooper's face when we left. Maggie's expression tightened. Me too. He's only 7, I said. He doesn't understand what happened. He just knows something went wrong and he wants to fix it. He hugged you. For 3 seconds, Maggie said. He was counting, I said. I felt him counting. Maggie pressed her lips together, her jaw shifting slightly. And Rosie, I said, standing by the fence, not crying, because she made up her mind not to give him the satisfaction. She gets that from you, Maggie said. She gets that from both of us, I said. Maggie shook her head. She gets it from both of us, and she's going to need it. She picked up her cup, set it back down without taking a sip, and looked at me. Ed, what are we going to do? I had been turning the answer over in my head from the moment we pulled out of that driveway. We don't go back, I said. I know. And we don't call them, I said. Not tomorrow. Not to smooth things over. Not to give Diane a chance to tell me I overreacted. Agreed, Maggie said. Not just that. Everything stops, I said. The groceries, the school runs, the repairs, all of it. It stops. Maggie nodded slowly. They're going to feel it real soon. Yes, I said. They are. I got up from the table, walked to the small desk in the corner of the kitchen where my brown notebook sat, and sat down. I wrote the date, the place, the sequence of events, Brandon's exact words as best as I could. Remember them, Diane's words, and the 50 people standing in that yard. I wrote it all, in the same clean print I had used for Rosie's name on the shoebox. When I finished, I looked at the page for a moment. Then I added one final line at the bottom. The shoebox is on the back seat. I still have it. I closed the notebook and walked back to the table. Maggie had refilled both our cups while I was writing. Tomorrow morning, I said, I'm not starting the truck. Maggie reached out, placing her hand over mine. No, she said, you're not. We sat in the kitchen as afternoon turned to evening, the light outside shifting from gold to amber, then into the deep orange of a buffalo summer sunset. We didn't need to say anything more about it, because everything necessary had been said. What remained was the quiet resolve of 2 ordinary people who had built a life over 42 years and weren't about to let anyone destroy what they had made. Sunday morning, I brewed coffee. I didn't start the truck. On the other side of town, 2 kids stood by the front door, waiting for a knock that wasn't coming. I heard about that first week from Rosie. She called me from her bedroom on Tuesday night after the party, using the cautious, hushed voice children adopt when they've made sure their parents are busy elsewhere. 7:43 p.m. I was at the shop taking inventory when her name lit up my phone screen. Grandpa, she said, her tone carrying a restrained relief that made my heart ache. Hey, Sweetheart, I said. Are you okay? I'm fine. A pause. Cooper cried at the school gate this morning. He didn't want Mom to leave because he kept saying it didn't feel right without you there. I set down the box I was holding. What did your mother do? She hugged him for a long, long time, and then she was late for work. Another pause. Her boss sent her a message about it. I closed my eyes for a second, then opened them, because closing them didn't help. How are you? Holding up. I'm fine, Rosie said in a tone that meant the exact opposite. Then, being Rosie, she couldn't keep up the act for more than 4 seconds. Math homework is hard without you. I got 2 problems wrong, and I didn't even realize until it was handed back. Which chapter? Fractions. Division. Flipping the second number and multiplying. I told you you knew it, you just need practice. I know, her voice dropped lower. But it's easier when you're here. My throat tightened. I know, buddy. Grandpa, she hesitated. Are you ever coming back? I thought for a moment about how to answer. I'm always your grandpa, I said. That isn't going to change. But some things need to change first. Do you understand? A long silence. Because of what Dad did. Because of what happened. Yes. He didn't apologize, she said, her voice turning flat and precise, the tone she used when stating a fact she couldn't accept. Not to you, not to Grandma. He told Mom it wasn't a big deal and that you provoked him. The pen in my hand pressed hard against the inventory sheet, tearing the paper slightly. I smoothed it down with my thumb. How is your mother doing? She's really tired, Rosie said. She comes home late now because she has to do the school pickups herself. We had cereal for dinner last night because she forgot to go to the store. A brief pause. We usually only have cereal for dinner when we're camping, not on a regular night. Cereal isn't the worst thing, I said. It was the wrong kind, Rosie said. The healthy kind, without sugar. Cooper cried about that too. Despite everything, I couldn't help a faint smile. Cooper cried over cereal. Cooper's crying over everything this week, Rosie said, her voice carrying a genuine concern that made her sound 40 years old. Grandpa, is Grandma okay? He keeps asking about her. Grandma is fine, I said, her knees bothering her a bit, but she's home. She's fine. You can tell Cooper she made cookies yesterday. What kind? Snickerdoodles. A sharp intake of breath. Those are his favorite. I know, I said. A pause. Then, can we come over to your house? The question hung in the air between us. I thought of Diane, of the conversation that had to happen first, of the sequence of events that couldn't be skipped over. Not right now, I said, but soon. Okay. Okay, she said. Then, very quietly. Grandpa, I'm sorry about your face. My hand automatically moved toward my cheek. The skin was still tender, showing a light discoloration. When Maggie looked at that mark on Tuesday morning, her expression told me everything she felt without a word. You don't need to apologize for that, I said. That isn't something you need to be sorry for. Do you hear me? I hear you, she said, but I'm still sorry. We talked for a few more minutes. She told me about a book she was reading, a fantasy story about dragons, and a girl who could talk to them. I asked questions, real ones, because I was genuinely interested, and because she needed to talk about something other than the wreckage of her week. By the time she said good night, her voice sounded far steadier than when she first called. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet shop for a while, surrounded by the smell of leather and contact cement, the warm, dusty scent unique to a space that represented 45 years of a man's life work. Through Rosie's calls that week and the next, I pieced together a picture of Brandon and Diane's life, without the invisible support structure they had never acknowledged. Monday, no one picked up the kids. Diane left work 40 minutes early. Her manager sent a follow-up email. Tuesday, no groceries were bought. Diane ordered takeout. $63 plus, delivery and tip. Wednesday, the bathroom faucet that had been leaking slowly for 3 weeks finally turned into a steady drip. Brandon watched a YouTube video and tried to fix it himself. He made it worse. A plumber came out. $240. Thursday, Cooper's field trip permission slip sat unsigned on the counter because no one remembered. His teacher called Diane's office. Diane stepped out of another meeting early. Friday, Rosie came home to an empty house for the first time. She spent 12 minutes alone before Diane arrived, but Rosie told me those 12 minutes felt very long. Hearing all this gave me no satisfaction. I want to make that clear. What I felt was a heavy, dull sadness. The gap between the home I had worked so hard to sustain and the appreciation they had never given was vast. Diane called me Friday night. I let it ring. She didn't leave a message. Then she called Maggie. Maggie picked up. I stood in the kitchen doorway, listening to her side of the conversation. Maggie's voice remained steady and measured. I understand, Diane. Then, yes, I know it's hard. A long pause followed, and I could hear Diane's voice through the receiver getting faster, higher. Sweetheart, your father hasn't gone anywhere. He's right where he's always been. The question is whether you can see that now. Diane said something else. Then the call ended. Maggie set the phone on the counter and looked at me. She's struggling, Maggie said. I know, I said. She isn't there yet, Maggie said. But she's close. Close wasn't the same as there. And what I didn't know yet was that the push that would bring Diane all the way there wouldn't come from me, and it wouldn't come from Maggie. It was going to come from Rosie. Diane's call came on a Tuesday afternoon, 2 weeks after the party. I was resoling a pair of work boots, good boots that a man saves up for and brings in to repair because he can't afford a new pair. I had always valued that kind of work. I was working on the second boot when the phone on the corner of the bench vibrated. I looked at the screen. Diane. I set the boot down and answered. Dad. Her voice sounded tight, which meant she had been preparing for this call for a while and had likely rehearsed her opening line. I need to talk to you about something Brandon told me. All right, I said. He said. She paused, then started over. He told me you've been telling people about him and Natalie, that they have something going on. Her voice carried a careful flatness, like a person reading from a script she didn't fully believe herself. He said you've been spreading rumors because you never liked him and saw an opportunity. I set my resoling tool on the workbench deliberately. Outside on Elmwood Avenue, a delivery truck rumbled past, making the front window vibrate slightly. Diane, I said, I haven't said a word to anyone about Brandon and Natalie. Then how does he know you think something's going on between them? Because he saw my face, I said. When a man knows what he's doing, he knows when someone sees right through him. A long silence followed, long enough that I could hear her breathing. Dad, he cried, she said, her voice cracking slightly on the word. When I asked him about it, he completely broke down. He said he's been trying so hard to keep everything together, and that you too. He said you've been poisoning the kids against him, and he can't take it anymore. My jaw set tight. I clenched my back teeth, breathing slowly through my nose. Did he say anything to imply I spoke to Rosie or Cooper? He said you told Rosie things. Diane interjected. At the party, before everything happened, he said you pulled her aside. I spoke to Rosie for about 4 minutes, I said. We talked about fractions and a book she was reading about dragons. Dad, Diane, I kept my voice steady, low, and clear. I did not pull your daughter aside to speak ill of her father. I tutored her in math for 3 years. We talked about fractions. Another silence, longer this time. He said. Diane started, stopped, and started again. He said you've always resented him, that you think he wasn't good enough for me. And this is your way of trying to break us up because you think you know better than anyone how my life should look. The work boots sat on the bench in front of me. Good leather, worn at the toe, resoled twice before this. Someone's livelihood. Someone who trusted me to fix it. Can I ask you something? I said. What? When Brandon cried, I said, did he answer the question? Did he say whether anything was going on with Natalie? The silence that followed was an answer in itself. He said there was nothing, Diane said finally. He said she's a neighbor and a family friend, and that you're making something out of nothing. All right, I said. Oh, okay. Her voice turned sharp. Is that all you're going to say? Diane, I'm not going to argue with you about what your husband tells you in your own kitchen, I said. Whatever you decide to believe, you'll believe. That's your right. So you're just going to keep punishing all of us, she said. The careful flatness was gone now, replaced by bare, exposed exhaustion. You're just going to keep staying away, not helping, not being around, just because your pride was hurt at a birthday party. Pride. I held the phone, looking at the boots on the bench, thinking of the $47,000 in groceries, the school runs, the furnace repairs, the gutters, the tuition. I thought of the bracelet on Natalie Voss's wrist. I thought of Brandon calling down to me from the deck. Since you're up there, check the flashing too. It wasn't my pride, Diane, I said quietly. What was it then? It was your daughter's pride, I said, standing in that yard watching her grandfather get hit. That's what it was. She didn't address that directly. Instead, she said, he apologized to me, Dad. He knows he went too far. He's going to work on it. I'm glad to hear that, I said. But you're still not coming back. Not right now, I said. No. She took a sharp breath. I can't keep going without, she trailed off. Without what? I asked. Another silence. Then, very softly, almost to herself. Without the things I didn't even realize you were doing. It was the closest she had come to, stating the truth plainly. I didn't push her. She wasn't ready to say it all the way. Pushing a person toward a truth they aren't ready to handle only makes them shatter it. I love you, Diane, I said. That hasn't changed. Then why does this feel like punishment? Because you're feeling the weight of things that were always there, I said. You just never had to carry them before. She hung up shortly after. I placed the phone beside the boot, feeling the specific exhaustion of a man who had spoken the truth, knowing it still wasn't enough. Not enough, at least not from this direction. Maggie showed up at the shop door at 5:30 holding 2 cups of coffee. In the 3 seconds it took her to walk from the entrance to my workbench, she read my face. Brandon explained everything, she said. It wasn't a question. He cried, I said. Maggie's expression turned complex. And she believed him. Enough to call and question me, I said, but not enough to be entirely sure. Maggie set the cups down, pulled over a customer stool, and sat across from the bench. Holding her cup in both hands, she looked at me with those steady eyes that had always been my truest compass. Ed, she said, The truth doesn't need us to push it. It just needs time. I picked up the boot, found my mark on the new sole, and pushed through the first stitch. How much time? I asked. The corner of Maggie's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Less than you think, she said. Rosie's been paying attention. I looked up at her. She watched me over the rim of her cup. Outside on Elmwood Avenue, the evening sun turned golden through the shop window, making the dust in the air look almost beautiful. The call came on a Tuesday night in the third week of August. It wasn't Rosie this time. It was Diane. Maggie and I were at the kitchen table eating beef stew. The slow cooker kind with carrots, potatoes, and bay leaves that she had made every other Tuesday for 30 years. My phone vibrated next to my plate. 8:14 p.m. Maggie looked up. I answered. Dad. Her voice wasn't tight or rehearsed like the last time. It was broken, completely raw. The voice of someone who had just pulled a heavy object from her chest and was still bleeding from the wound. Can you talk right now? I pushed my chair back from the table. I'm here. What happened? A sound came through the phone that wasn't words. The sound a person makes when they've been holding up a weight for too long and their arms finally give out. Rosie told me something tonight, she said. I looked across the table at Maggie. She laid her fork down. She told me she kept seeing Brandon sneaking over to Natalie's house in the morning, back when you used to drive them to school. Her voice cracked. He told her not to tell me, said it was adult business and that she wouldn't understand. Where is she now? I asked. In her room, Cooper's, asleep. A pause. She cried when she told me. Kept saying she was sorry, like it was her fault. I held her and told her it wasn't her fault, that she did nothing wrong. And I don't know how to. She stopped, taking a long, shaky breath. Dad, what do I do now? I said. You go back into Rosie's room. You stay with her. You tell her she did nothing wrong, that she was brave, and that telling the truth was the absolute right thing to do. And then, just let tonight be tonight. You don't have to solve everything right now. A long silence followed. Then, did you know all along? I thought of the blue Audi on Maple Road at 6:03 a.m. I thought of Maggie's Manila envelope. I thought of the $795 bracelet. I had reason to believe something was wrong, I said. I didn't have the right to force it on you until you were ready to hear it. Diane let out a sound somewhere between a laugh and a cry. That's such a dad answer. It's the honest one, I said. I confronted him, she said. He denied everything, said Rosie, misunderstood. Said kids her age have big imaginations, that she probably just saw him dropping off dry cleaning. The slow cooker hissed on the counter. I clenched my back teeth. Dry cleaning, I said. At 6 in the morning, Diane said. At a neighbor's house. A broken pause. The worst part, Dad, is that for about 30 seconds, I almost let myself believe him. Because believing him was so much easier than facing this. I know, I said. But then I remembered Rosie's face when she told me. She was terrified, but she said it anyway. That's not a child making up a story about dry cleaning. No, I said. It isn't. After I told him I didn't believe him, he left, grabbed his keys and walked out. Her voice trembled. I don't think I want to know where he is tonight. That's fine, I said. Dad. A long pause. I'm so sorry for what I said at the party, about telling you to let it go. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I think, down under everything, I knew something wasn't right. But I still chose him because I was scared, and you got hurt for it, right in front of everyone. My throat was so tight I could barely speak. Diane, no. Gentle, but firm. Let me finish. You drove through snowstorms for us. You fixed things at 2 in the morning. You sat at a plastic table at Rosie's party without making a scene, saying nothing. You didn't have to say a word. And then he hit you, and I told you to let it go. Her voice broke completely. I told you to let it go. Dad. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth for a moment. When I could speak again, I said, "You were scared. That doesn't make it right, no. But I understand, and I love you. Both of those things can be true at the same time." She cried then. A real cry, the kind that had been building up for weeks and finally found a way out. I held the phone, listening to my daughter cry 8 miles away, wishing I could flatten those 8 miles into nothing. Maggie watched me from across the table, her face showing every expression she wore whenever her children were hurting. Brow furrowed, jaw tight, eyes shining with a grief that belonged entirely to someone else. I reached across and touched her hand. She turned her palm over and held mine. When Diane's breathing evened out, I said, "Go be with Rosie. That's the only thing that matters right now." "Okay." A pause. "Dad?" "Yeah. Thank you for not saying I told you so. That was never something I was going to say," I said. "I know," she said. "That's why I'm thanking you." She hung up. The stew on our plates was cold. Neither of us touched it. Maggie held my hand tight, her eyes bright. "Rosie told her," I said. "Yes." Maggie's chin quivered slightly before setting firm again. That little girl is going to be all right, Ed." "I know," I said. I looked at our hands holding on across the table. My rough, stained ones and Maggie's swollen, careful ones. 42 years together at this table. "Maggie," I said, "I think it's about time." She reached into her cardigan pocket and placed the manila envelope on the table between our plates. Her gaze was steady and sure. "Almost," she said. "There's still one more thing to do first." Outside on Elmwood Avenue, the neighbors' porch lights flickered on in the early night. Summer was beginning to realize it only had a few weeks left. I picked up the envelope on Thursday morning, August 22nd. Back in June, when I made my last repair at Brandon and Diane's house. Before the party, when I used a hand snake to clear a clog in the upstairs bathroom drain. I left my pipe wrench behind. It had been sitting on my tool cloth on the bathroom floor, and I packed up everything else but missed that one tool. I needed it that afternoon. A customer, named Gerald, a retired mailman, who brought his shoes in every spring and fall, and always stayed to chat for 20 minutes, had a leaking pipe under his kitchen sink. Gerald was 81, lived alone, and was the kind of man who'd let a small leak turn into a big one before bothering anyone for help. I called Diane first. She told me to come over. Brandon had been staying at a hotel since Tuesday. I drove to Amherst at 9:15 a.m. Diane opened the door looking like someone who had slept 4 hours in 2 days. Hair in a ponytail, coffee in one hand, laptop under her arm. She squeezed my wrist briefly when I walked in. "The wrench is probably still in the upstairs bathroom," she said. "Cooper and Rosie are over at my friend Janet's. Things are chaotic here, and I didn't want them in the middle of it." "I'll be 2 minutes," I said. I found the pipe wrench in the back of the vanity cabinet upstairs, right where I'd left it. I slipped it into my tool bag and started down the stairs. That was when I heard it. The garage door was open. Brandon's car was in the driveway. I'd noticed it earlier and kept it in mind. But what I hadn't expected was Brandon himself at the far end of the garage, near the workbench I'd built for him 3 years ago. His back was to the house, and he was on the phone. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs. The door was cracked open. I wasn't hiding. The conversation reached my ears before I could even decide whether to listen. The market timing is right. His voice was low and rushed. Crenshaw at the firm thinks we can list by mid-September. If we price it right, we close before November. A pause. With the equity plus what's in my personal account, the down payment on the Williamsville place won't be an issue. The one I showed you. His tone softened, turning warmer. I know it's been a long wait. Just a little longer. Once I file the divorce papers, it's done. 6 weeks, 8 at most. I stood tall and still. She doesn't know about the Williamsville property, he said. She's so busy falling apart right now, she isn't looking at any of the financials. Her dad actually made this easier. That drama with him gave me all the cover I needed. She's so focused on that mess that she stopped checking the accounts. He laughed. A short, self-satisfied chuckle. The sound of a man very pleased with himself. I looked down at the pipe wrench in my hand. My knuckles were white around the handle, and I hadn't even consciously told my hand to squeeze. I took 30 seconds to breathe slowly. Then I walked down the hall toward the front door. Diane looked up from her laptop. Found it? Right where I left it, I said. My voice sounded calm. To this day, I don't know how I managed that. She looked at my face. Ed, what's wrong? Is Brandon planning to sell this house? I asked. The blood drained from her face instantly. What? He's in the garage. The door's open. I didn't mean to listen, but I heard him. Diane set her coffee down. Her hands were shaking. She pressed them flat on the counter to steady herself. What did he say? I told her everything. The September listing, Crenshaw at the firm, the Williamsville property, the timeline for filing the divorce, and the part about me. How the conflict with me had given him cover to move funds while she was distracted. By the time I finished, Diane was sitting on the kitchen floor. Not a dramatic collapse. She had just reached behind her for these cabinets and slid down until she was sitting on the tile. Knees pulled up, hands pressed tight over her mouth. Eyes staring into nothing. He's going to sell my house, she said. Our house, and take the money. That's what it sounds like, I said. He showed me a listing in Williamsville once. Her voice came out barely audible. Said it was for investment. 2 months ago, I signed a document. He said, it was a routine bank review. I didn't read it carefully. She pressed her hands tighter against her mouth. I crouched down in front of her, my bad knee complaining loudly. I didn't care. Diane, call a lawyer today. Not tomorrow, today. Don't sign anything else. Don't move money from any joint accounts. Don't let him back in this house until you know your legal standing. Do you hear me? Her jaw set firm, in a way I recognized instantly. Maggie's jaw. The look that appeared whenever the women in my family stopped falling and started standing up. I reached into my jacket and placed the manila envelope on the tile between us. Your mother spent 4 months gathering this, quietly and carefully, without saying a word until she was certain everything was accurate. Diane picked up the envelope with both hands. Mom did this. Your mother's been paying attention since April, I said. She handles things with care, without a fuss, and her judgment on all of this was dead right. Diane's eyes filled. A single tear, a single tea, spilling from each side and tracing straight down her cheeks with the quiet dignity of a woman, choosing to face reality rather than break down. I have the best parents, she said, her voice cracking on the last word. My throat closed up completely. I reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, just like I used to do when she was 4 years old. She rested her head against my hand for a brief second. "You're going to be all right," I said. "I know," she said, and she meant it. I, I helped her up and left her at the kitchen table with the envelope, her phone, and the name of the lawyer Maggie had written on a slip inside. Because, of course, Maggie had included that too. I drove to Gerald's house with my pipe wrench, spent 40 minutes fixing his leak, and then sat while he brewed coffee and talked for 25 minutes about his late wife's garden and early tomato varieties. I listened to every word and was genuinely glad to be there. On the drive home, I called Maggie. "She has the envelope," I said. "Good. Did she see the lawyer's number inside?" "She did." A pause on the line, then a warm voice. "That's my good girl." "Which daughter?" I asked. Maggie laughed, that deep laugh from her chest that had been the finest sound in my life for 42 years. "Both of them," she said. The sign went up on Friday evening. I printed it at the shop, using the good cardstock paper I used for printing receipts. Clean lettering, the same font I'd used for the front window of the shop for 30 years. Neighborhood Appreciation Gathering. Saturday, August 30th, 6 p.m. Callaway Residence. All welcome. I posted one in the shop window and one on the lamppost at the end of our driveway, then stopped thinking about it for the night. By Saturday morning, Ruth called asking what she could bring. By noon, I'd heard from the Kowalskis, Pete and Linda Marchetti from 2 doors down, 3 families from Rosie and Cooper's school carpool, and Doyle, who had brought his cowboy boots to my shop for repairs since 1987 and considered that a standing invitation to any event I hosted. I told everyone the same thing. Just bring yourselves. This is an appreciation, not a special occasion. Maggie started cooking on Friday night. By Saturday afternoon, the kitchen was filled with the warm scent of beef stew, apple pie, and cinnamon snickerdoodles. A third batch of cookies, requested by Cooper with all the serious negotiation of a man reviewing contract terms. He asked if there would be those little hot dogs. I told Maggie. Maggie pointed her spatula at me. "Tell him if he shows up with his sister and his manners, there will be hot dogs." I passed it along. Cooper said, "Deal," and hung up. I set up 3 long folding tables borrowed from the St. Anthony's Community Hall, covering them with blue tablecloths bought from the dollar store that Maggie kept in the linen closet for occasions like this. I lit the charcoal grill at 4 p.m. so it would be ready by 6. The shoebox sat on the kitchen table. 2 weeks ago, the day after the party, I'd brought it in from the truck. It had remained in the middle of the table ever since, between the sugar bowl and the fruit basket, resting patiently like an object that knew it would be opened at the right moment. Today was that moment. Inside the shoebox, beside Rosie's wrapped shoes, I placed the manila envelope, updated over the past 2 weeks with the mortgage refinancing document Brandon had Diane sign in June, which her lawyer identified as an attempt to transfer sole signing authority for the property to Brandon without her informed consent. Financial records subpoenaed from the joint account showing 17 transfers to a personal account Brandon had hidden from Diane. My brown notebook opened to the pages listing every repair, every grocery run, every pickup, every tuition payment, and the 3:00 a.m. furnace call. I didn't put those things on the table out of malice. I put them there because Brandon Hurst had spent 6 years building a story about me. An old man with shoe polish on his hands, tagging along, fixing small things, barely tolerated by everyone. I put them on the table so that story would never have a place to stand again. The guests arrived at 5:45 p.m. Ruth came first, in her sensible walking shoes, carrying a plate of lemon bars. The Kowalskis arrived in a cheerful wave. 3 generations. The grandmother hugging Maggie on the front walkway with the warmth of 2 women who had navigated many Buffalo winters together. Pete Marchetti's teenage son headed straight for the grill, drawn by that natural gravitational pull young men have toward fire. By 6:15 p.m., there were 47 people in the yard. I counted, because I'm the kind of man who counts. Diane arrived at 6:20 with Rosie and Cooper, wearing a blue dress, her hair done, a clarity in her eyes I hadn't seen in weeks. She met my gaze at the gate and gave a single nod. I nodded back. Rosie walked straight to me and wrapped both arms around my waist without a word. I rested my hand on the back of her head, holding her close. Cooper headed right for Maggie, asking about the snickerdoodles, loud enough for 12 people to hear. Brandon arrived at 6:32 p.m. Button-down shirt, ironed trousers, freshly polished shoes. He scanned the yard with the relaxed posture of a man who had assessed the situation and decided he was in complete control. He extended a hand to me at the gate. Firm 2 shakes. Ed, nice of you to put this together. Glad you could make it, I said. He stepped into the yard, shook Pete's hand, grabbed a beer from the cooler, and put an arm around Diane's shoulder. I watched Diane's jaw tighten as much as she allowed herself. I watched Rosie look at her father from by the food table, her expression looking 10 years older than it had 3 weeks ago. Maggie appeared beside me, handing me a glass of iced tea. He thinks this is an olive branch, she whispered. I know, I said. Is Natalie coming? Ruth invited her, I said. I asked her to, Ruth said. Natalie never misses a neighborhood gathering, takes pride in it. I need her here tonight. Maggie looked at me over her glass. A long beat passed. Then, I think we're ready. The evening proceeded like all good gatherings do. Food, laughter, the low hum of cicadas in the maple trees forming a backdrop. Children wove between adult legs. Someone told a joke by the grill, and 3 people laughed at once. I tended the grill. I refilled drinks. I moved through my yard among my neighbors, smiling genuinely at everyone. Because these people, Ruth, Pete, Doyle, the Kowalskis, were the living record of my life on this street. At 7:15 p.m., I set the tongs down. I walked inside, brought out the dark green shoebox, and set it on the center table. I picked up the small wireless microphone Ruth had borrowed for me from the community hall. 47 people. A yard always falls quiet like that when someone picks up a microphone. Brandon looked over from where he leaned against the back fence, holding his beer. I began speaking. I started with thanks. That part wasn't an act. Most of you have known me a long time, I said into the microphone, my voice steady and unhurried. Some of you brought shoes to my shop before your children were born. Some of you have been neighbors since Maggie and I moved onto this street 31 years ago. I wanted to put this gathering together tonight because I think we sometimes forget to say thank you out loud to the people who keep our lives running smoothly. I looked at Ruth first. Ruth, for 15 years you've walked past my house every morning and waved. It sounds like a small thing, but it's only small if you've never felt invisible during a Buffalo winter. Ruth pressed her hand to her chest, her eyes bright. Mrs. Kowalski, 2 years ago when Maggie's knee was acting up, you picked up her prescriptions every Tuesday for 3 weeks straight without being asked twice. I haven't forgotten. Mrs. Kowalski held Maggie's hand tight. Maggie squeezed back, her set jaw showing she was feeling an emotion she'd decided not to cry over. I looked around the yard slowly, thanking Pete Marchetti for helping me replace a section of fence on a Saturday without taking a dime, Doyle for sending 17 customers to my shop over the years, and the Hendersons, whose son had shoveled our walkway twice this winter without being asked. Brandon still stood by the back fence, holding his beer. The smile remained on his face, but it had tightened at the edges. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he hasn't quite categorized yet. Then I turned to Diane. I want to thank my daughter. Raising her was the second best thing I ever did in this life. The best was convincing her mother to marry me. A warm murmur ran through the yard. Maggie let out a sound that was almost a laugh. Diane taught me things about patience I didn't know I needed to learn. She's stronger than she gives herself credit for, and she's going to be just fine. Diane grew very still, her eyes locked on my face, her jaw trembling with the effort of holding her composure through sheer willpower. I let those words settle. Then I reached into the shoebox. I also want to be honest with you tonight, because I'm 70 years old, and the older you get, the easier honesty becomes. The quality of attention in the yard shifted, pulling tight, leaning forward. I spent 6 years supporting my daughter's household. I drove to her house at 5 in the morning to get my grandchildren to school. I cleared the snow off their driveway before their father's car ever pulled out. I fixed their furnace at 2 in the morning when it was 12 degrees outside in January. I kept my voice steady. I'm not telling you this to ask for credit. I'm telling you because what I did was invisible, and invisible things are easily mistaken for having no value at all. I flipped open my brown notebook. 847 school runs, 23 repair jobs, 41 grocery trips, 14 months of mortgage assistance, 3 tuition payments, and 1 furnace installed at 2 in the morning by a man whose idea of thanks was coming downstairs to ask, "Is it fixed yet?" before heading back to bed. Brandon set his beer down on the fence post. 3 months ago, in front of 50 guests at my granddaughter's birthday party, because I asked my son-in-law not to grab my 10-year-old granddaughter's arm, he slapped me across the face. He told me I was nobody, that fixing shoes gave me no standing. I paused. And my daughter told me to let it go because it was a birthday party. I drew out the manila envelope. I'm not here tonight to make a scene. I'm standing here so everyone in this yard knows the full picture. Not my version, but the documented one. 4 photos, laid face up on the table, time-stamped between 5:45 and 6:15 a.m. Brandon's car parked in front of a house down the street. On mornings he had told Diane he was going to work early. A hotel receipt from February 14th, Valentine's Day, charged to a personal account Diane knew nothing about. A jewelry invoice for $795, dated the same week I transferred $800 for Rosie's tuition. That bracelet wasn't bought for my granddaughter. Bank records showing 17 transfers from the joint account to an undisclosed personal account over 14 months. Ed. Brandon pushed away from the fence, his voice thin and tight. This isn't the place for this. I'm nearly done, I said, without looking at him. The final document. The refinancing authorization Diane had signed under the pretense that it was a routine bank review, which her lawyer had confirmed was an attempt to transfer sole signing authority to Brandon so he could sell the house without her consent. A dead silence fell over the yard. Brandon took 2 steps toward the table. This is a complete distortion of the facts, you. He stopped. The gate opened. Natalie Voss walked in, her hair done, a smile ready, scanning the yard with the easy confidence of a person accustomed to being welcomed. Her eyes found Brandon, then the table, then the face-up photos on the cloth. Her smile collapsed like a dropped object. 47 people turned to look at her. Her hand moved to her wrist, touching that bracelet. An instinctual gesture she didn't even realize she made. I folded my hands on the table and looked straight at Brandon. "I didn't invite this community here to humiliate you," I said. "I invited them because you spent 6 years trying to make me invisible among them, making jokes about my hands and my shop in rooms filled with people who knew me before you were born." My voice remained steady. "I invited them so that the next time you tell someone who I am, they'll already know the truth." Brandon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Diane stepped forward. She walked right past her husband without giving him a single glance and stood solidly at my side. She took my hand, holding it so tightly it would have hurt if it were anyone else. She turned to Brandon. "You need to leave," she said, her voice completely steady. She had Maggie's jaw and the spine she had found, after spending 3 weeks learning what she was truly made of. Brandon looked at her, looked at the yard, and then looked at Natalie, who was backing toward the gate, with her eyes glued to the ground. He grabbed his keys and walked out of my yard without a word. The gate clicked shut. Behind him, the yard began to breathe again. Not all at once. People found their voices in pairs and trios, like a room slowly filling with air after a storm window had been open for too long. Ruth put her arm around Mrs. Kowalski. Pete Marchetti cleared his throat and picked up his plate. Doyle whispered something to the man beside him, who gave a slow, deliberate nod. Natalie Voss left through the gate without speaking to anyone. I didn't watch her go. I started sliding the documents back into the manila envelope. Diane stood beside me to help, handing me each page every time I reached out. About to precise. Her movements were remarkably precise, like someone who had crossed through shock to the other side and found everything suddenly simple and clear. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. "Ask me in a week," she said. "But yeah, I think I'm going to be fine. I am." Cooper appeared from somewhere in the crowd, squeezing between us, throwing an arm around each of our waists and pressing his face hard against my hip. 7-year-olds sometimes understand that a hug is the only right response. When they get that, it's something remarkable. I rested my hand on the back of his head and held him tight. Rosie walked up and stopped right in front of me. She looked up with those serious dark eyes, and inside them I could see everything she had understood and everything she was still trying to process. "Grandpa," she said, "is the hardest part over now?" "The hardest part is over," I said. "Yes." She looked at the dark green shoebox sitting on the table, still tied, still wrapped. "Is that still mine?" she asked. "It was always yours," I said. She carried it to the far end of the table, sat down and untied the twine with the quiet focus she gave to everything that mattered. She folded back the paper. She took out one shoe, turned it over, and read the words stamped into the insole, her lips moving softly. She looked up. "You stamped this." "With the smallest lettering set I owned," I said. "Walk with kindness wherever you go." She read every word carefully, the way she read things she wanted to hold on to. "That's my entire wish for you," I said, putting it into a single sentence. She set the shoe down, crossed the 3 feet between us, and wrapped both arms around my waist. Just like she had when she was 6, 7, 8, with the total, unreserved commitment of a child who hadn't learned to hold back her feelings. I held her close, feeling something that had been pulled tight inside my chest for a long time finally let go. Over her head, I looked at Maggie. She stood at the end of the table, her coffee cold as usual, watching us with an expression she wasn't making any effort to control. For Maggie, that was the most complete form of happiness I knew. The evening drew to a close the way all good evenings do. Ruth was the last to leave. She hugged me at the gate without saying a word, which was the finest kind of goodbye. By 9 o'clock, the yard belonged to us again. Maggie and I moved through it together, gathering plates and folding chairs, moving like partners who had cleaned up after 1,000 gatherings and didn't need to direct each other. Diane sat at the far table drinking tea, with Rosie and Cooper asleep on either side of her, leaning against her. She watched us move around the yard with a look I chose not to try to analyze. Some things need to be felt before they can be named. When the yard was cleared, I sat down across from her. "Dad," she said softly, careful not to wake the kids. "I spent 6 years choosing comfort over the truth, not just with Brandon, but with you too. I told myself that because you never complained, there was nothing to complain about. Because you always showed up, showing up didn't cost you anything." Her eyes were dry. She had done her crying and reached a firmer place. "I was wrong. I'm sorry. Not the kind of sorry that ends an argument, but the other kind. I know. I'm going to do better," she said. "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know what it won't look like." "That's a good start," I said. Maggie sat down beside me. Her hand found mine under the table, and I held it tight. In the weeks that followed, the things that needed to happen took their course. Brandon moved out of the house on his lawyer's advice. The refinancing paperwork was set aside. The financial records told a complete story, the kind that didn't leave much room for argument. I didn't gloat, not once. Never brought it up to anyone. On the second Saturday in October, Rosie came to the shop after school, backpack on her shoulders, wearing the brown leather shoes I had made for her. She sat on the wooden stool in the corner, the same one Diane had sat on as a child, with the left leg that still wobbled slightly, and opened her math book. "Fractions again?" I asked. "Percentages," she said. "Can you help?" I pulled over my stool. "I'm already sitting right here," I said. A little while later, she looked up. "Grandpa, when you love someone and they hurt you anyway, what does that mean?" I set my needle down. I looked at my granddaughter, 10 years old, wearing my hand-stitched shoes, asking a question I had spent 70 years turning over in my mind. "It means you cared deeply," I said, "and it means you're going to be all right." She gave a serious nod and went back to her percentages. I went back to repairing an Oxford shoe. These hands have fixed a lot of things over the years. But the most important thing they ever made was a small pair of brown leather shoes stamped with a few simple words. "Walk with kindness wherever you go." That's all I hope to leave behind. At 70 years old, I learned something I wish someone had told me when I was 35. Kindness doesn't mean making yourself invisible. Giving to the people you love doesn't mean agreeing to disappear inside that love. I spent 6 years believing that keeping quiet was the same as keeping the peace. It wasn't. It was just letting the damage build up where nobody had to look at it. I'm not a perfect man. I waited too long. I absorbed too much. I told myself patience was a virtue, but sometimes it was just fear. Fear of a scene, fear of the cost, fear of what honesty would demand from the people I was trying to protect. If you're carrying someone else's weight right now in silence and calling it love, I want you to hear this. You're allowed to set it down, not to walk away from it. but to set it down, look at it clearly, and decide what you're willing to carry and what needs to be talked through first. There's a reason we were given a voice. Use yours before the silence. Costs you more than the truth ever would. Stories like this don't end with every wrong erased and medals handed out. They end with people trying to do better. That's enough. Most of the time, that's everything. This was only a story about justice in the quietest sense, not born of anger, but of a man finally deciding that his dignity was worth the exact same protection he had always given to everyone else.